rising powers today in the world are resetting the global economy. There's no question about it when you think about the rise of China or India, Brazil, but they haven't done so yet. I think much of the popular media depicts this change as if it's already happened, and that Europe somehow is now not so relevant. I think the reality is different. Europe is in a strong position in some areas, like trade and services and investment, to reposition itself for the coming global economy. But it has about 10 years, I think, at the most, to use that time to reposition itself for this new world of sort of multiple centers of power and growth.
So the Great Reset is not particularly about the changes already taking place in Europe, which still have to be completed, but it's about the change of the status of the global economy, in which Europe has to find a new place.
That's right. You know, the developed world, if you will, accounts for about 55% of global GDP. That's still more than half, but 10 years ago it was 70%. 10 years from now it's going to be 40%. So the developing world is going to drive the global economy. So what does that mean for Europe? It means Europe needs to leverage that growth through its markets, through its exports and investments, and tap into that growth. That's one thing it needs to do now.
Europe doesn't really have a great track record when it comes to improving competitiveness. We've seen the problems in the Eurozone, we've seen the failure of the Lisbon strategy in the previous decade. How do you see Europe?
Europe has strengths and weaknesses. It is a strong trader, #1 in the world. It's a strong investor, #1 in the world. It is a very strong services economy, not just a manufacturing engine. But it hasn't tapped that strength. It has but some key weaknesses. It's an aging, declining, shrinking population. It really has to reform its immigration policies. It has to accept more immigrants who are high-skilled to contribute to the talent pool in Europe, because otherwise I think Europe's demographic challenge will become constricting for Europe, and it won't be able to master the changes that are necessary.
One of the points in your study that you highlight is that Europe has a great potential in the services sector, but that still has to materialize. What hopes do you have for services in Europe?
Services are the sleeping giant of the European economy. About 70% of the European economy is in services. All the net job growth in the EU in the last decade has come only from services. So if you could extend the services directive in Europe and implement what exists today, free up the ability of Europeans with certain skills to work in other European countries, and to invest in services elsewhere in the world, Europe could have another boost of growth, say 1 to 2% of GDP a year, just in that one sector. And really, if you look at the world today, it's only Europe and the United States, really, a few other countries that are services economies. The rising powers are not. And so it's a big open market for Europe that it could tap, but it's not yet.
So is that a message for the people talking about improved competitiveness in Europe? People like Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, who call this special Eurozone Competitiveness Summit?
It's one message, I think. One is to awaken the sleeping giant of services. A second is complete the single market. Be serious about creating a true single market, because it's a world now of continents competing with each other. And the single market is potentially a big open continental market. That would be Europe's biggest strength in the coming global economy. It has to do these things, though, and it has to have sort of a pan-European talent strategy that allows high-skilled people to be able to work and prosper, and if they come from abroad, to integrate into European societies. Those are really critical needs if Europe's really going to be competitive.
You're talking about skilled labor. You're also talking about the need for additional immigration. Your study highlights one very interesting fact, actually, that a big percentage of the immigration to Europe is in the low-skilled region, where that is completely different in the US. That poses a particular challenge for Europe.
It does. Europe is failing in the global competition for talent. It has become a magnet for the unskilled. About 85% of all the unskilled migrants in the world come to Europe. only 5% come to the United States of legal migrants. But 55% of the highest skilled migrants in the world come to the United States, and only 5% come to Europe. That is not a winning proposition for Europe when its population is aging and shrinking. And it has to have more productivity. It has to come from these, it's a knowledge economy, it has to come from high skill innovation. It's going to be just essential to Europe. So reforming the labor strategy, reforming labor markets, skills training, migration and integration policies is probably the core challenge that Europe is going to face for the next 10 years.
So you're saying migration and a sound migration policy for Europe, for all European member states, is essential if Europe wants to be competitive on the long term?
It is probably the issue of aging, shrinking populations, the demographic challenge of Europe is the Achilles heel of the European Union. If Europe does not master this challenge, you will see a fracturing within Europe as some countries prosper, maintain their high world-class competitive position, and other countries start to falter and unable to keep up. And you'll see a fracturing within Europe that will be quite severe. If Europeans want to avoid that, there are a number of areas in which they really do have to have a European approach, not just 27 different approaches. Right now, you know, the EU is less than the sum of its parts. 2 + 2 does not equal 4. And the potential of adding the European dimension to many of these policies is that 2 + 2 could equal 5 or more. It's the value added of the European dimension that in many cases just missing. And I don't say this to promote the EU, I simply say it as an observer looking at what's happening in the rest of the world, where other continents are coming together at a speed that I think is not fully appreciated here.
So the economic rationale may be very obvious, but the social possibilities in Europe may be limited. Does that worry you?
Europe has to face the fact that it is an immigration continent, not just an immigration country or collection of countries, but a continent of immigration. And that immigration is going to be the key to success for Europe's prosperity in the future. If Europeans want to maintain the welfare state, the social services they enjoy, all of the benefits of European life, they have to welcome more people into that society, and both people who are high-skilled, but also those who are low-skilled to come to have the skills then and the education, the training to make it in this society. You know, upward movement, all sorts of policies that encourage integration will be really essential. That goes against, in some countries, you know, centuries of history. But that's part of the reset. The reset is happening all over the world, and that particular reset is what's happening here in Europe.
And Europe has to find its own position in that reset. Dan, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again in a few years' time maybe to see how things are.
Very good. Thank you.